So I'm adding white and a little yellow, and I'm just doing a thin layer on my canvas. You don't want it too thick because you want it to dry fairly quickly so you can move on. If you're not used to painting in acrylics, the really wonderful thing about them is that they dry quickly and you can layer after layer, whether it's because you didn't like something you painted and you have to come back to it, or if you just want to put more layers and more interest and more texture onto your canvas. So that's what I really love about acrylic paints. So again, all I'm doing is putting a little bit of yellow in some white and giving a first coat onto the canvas. This kind of fills up the weave of the canvas a little bit and absorbs in and helps you move more easily with your subsequent layers. I'm doing this, like I say, maybe I'll put it up here. You can see it until I run out of space anyway. I'm doing this little ocean scene, and it was actually kind of a little bit of an overcast day. So, but I thought I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle and warmth to the scene anyway. So that's why I'm using this yellow. You really can use any color. Oftentimes I cover this underpainting up entirely, so you really don't see any of it. But sometimes it does kind of come through in the thinner layers of the painting, the areas that have less paint on the canvas. So it's kind of fun to do. You can use very bright colors, complementary colors. It's really something fun to play around with. You can also underpaint different colors in different areas of your canvas. So you might do a different color in the sky than you do maybe in a shadowed area of the ground. But this particular scene doesn't have a lot of shadow in it. It has a little bit of shadow here in the tree area and underneath the rocks, but mostly it's just kind of an evenly lit, somewhat overcast day. So we'll just go with this and see how we like it, and we may cover up all of it and we may not. That kind of depends on how we feel. And the next thing that we're going to do is take a smaller brush and do a little bit of drawing. And it's really not drawing at all. It's really just a roadmap, just a way to put in where the big shapes are and understand where we're going to put those in our composition. So it's going to be a little different because in this composition it's a square format, as you can see, and I'm putting it on a landscape format at 8x10, and so it's going to have more area off to this side and off to this side. So I'm going to think about that when I place my main shapes. So as far as main shapes, we've got a sky, we've got some background hills, we've got a distant tree line, and then we've got this what's the word I'm thinking of? The terrible thing about painting is you use the opposite side of the brain than your words are on. So it can be really difficult to hop back and forth and to actually speak when you're painting, but I'm trying to get better at that. Midground, that's what you call this. Foreground, midground, background. So in this midground, we've got this big shape of this trees and rocks, and then we've got this very large foreground. And you notice that the foreground is placed not right in the middle. So you want to be careful not to put your horizon line or your line here right in the middle, but instead a good placement for it is to move it up to 1/3, so a 1/3 line. So if I take, let's just take a little bit of this ultramarine blue to do some drawing with. Doesn't matter what color, any color works. But if I decide where my third is on my painting, Now, this is just a much looser way to do a drawing or a road map than actually, you know, like a lot of times I'll give you a line drawing and we put the line drawing exactly onto the canvas. But this is a much more loose way to do it. And I think it helps keep you loose in your painting as well. So if that's about at a third, and then I'm going to think about this big line here. So this line on the painting, you can see this as what they call a leading line. And you like to use leading lines to bring the eye into your painting and then to sort of a focal area in the painting. And in this one, the focal area is going to be right here where this big rock is and this little grouping of trees. And because we're getting bigger in this painting, I'll probably have to do a little more interest in this area to make it, because I'm just going to have more space to cover. But I want to think about how I'm going to bring this leading line in and back over and where I'm going to put this focal point. So I like having a little bit of this background showing. I don't want, but I want it to come a little bit further out from the middle. So maybe about in here, and this line starts down a little bit. So if this line is this line, then we've got the rocks going in here, coming up, and we're not quite sure yet how big they're going to go, but I want to get that as my ending point of my leading line. And then here comes the water, and I'll have to decide, because my shape is different, this is going to leave a lot more water if I do it that way, and I don't think I really want a whole lot more water. Maybe something like that. And one thing you want to be careful with is not to make your line completely a rounded arc, because that doesn't give you the right perspective. When things get further away, they get thinner, the lines get thinner and closer together. So back here, you're going to go almost horizontal, and then when we make our curve, then we're going to round it out and come down to the bottom, and we'll see how that works. And then over here, we've got a little outcropping that we're going to put of rocks in here. And what else are we going to do? We're going to now get a little bit more paint. We're going to put, we are going to come up here and say, okay, this is that line. So up here we've got the tree line about in here. This is just to give us a road map again. And then we're going to have the hills coming up along here. And then over here we're going to bring these rocks in, because remember we're a little bit longer. So if I put my big rock in here, and then I have these trees going up like this, and then it dips down here to this level, and then it comes back up. Now I've got trees going up here, and then I've got this rock coming in. Well, actually these trees are going to stay down here. So we got a little bit of sky showing all the way across the top. Don't worry, you can go over all of this stuff later. It's just to give us a road map. And then I want to make sure I've got these rocks coming in like this. These are the rocks that are down along here. And then we're going to put in some stuff in here. Going to get this rounded shape going on. So you see, it's just kind of to give us an idea of where we're going. Got a little bit of sand going down there, so that should be good enough. This rock, I'm thinking, because this is bigger, I might even make this a little bit more prominent. This rock, we'll see. Well, this is the rock. That was the trees. That's why I wanted the rock more like in here. And then the trees maybe like here. All right, so we got an idea anyway. And yours can be a little bit different, and however it works for you. All right, so once I get that drawing in there, Then I'm going to go back to a slightly bigger brush and I'm going to start my block in. And the block in stage again is just to block in my big shapes in the right value, the approximate color, but the right value. So we're working big to little, and we're trying to keep our eye away from going straight to the details. Instead, we want to think big flat shapes in the right value. The value being how light or dark something is. So we're going to start here with the sky and see if we can't get a value we like. I'm going to use, whenever you're trying to mix a very light color, you want to start with your white versus starting with your color, because it's really easy to get too much color into a very light mixture. So what I'm doing is adding just a little corner of phthalo and a little corner of ultramarine blue. So both of my blues. My phthalo, this is phthalo right there, and that's a very blue-green color, or a cool blue. And this is ultramarine, which is more of a warm blue. It's leaning towards purple. Ooh, I had some yellow in my brush there. That's interesting. I like it. Again, it's not so important the color at this point. What's most important is the value. And if this is the value I want in my sky, and that's going to be a very light area of my painting, almost the lightest light, except for the whites in the water and the really light spots on the rocks. So the rest of the painting is going to revolve, the values in the rest of the painting will revolve around that first value, that lightest value that you put down. So as you see, as I moving down towards the horizon with this sky, I've added more white to the paint, and that's because that's the way it works in nature. It's always going to be lighter towards the horizon. You see how that yellow underpainting is really influencing the sky a lot at this point, because I don't have very much paint on the canvas yet, and you can really see that yellow coming through. And I may keep that around, I may use that, or I may decide that I want to cover it up more opaquely, but that gives me some things to play with in the future. So after the sky, let's come down to our next large shape we're going to block in. Remember, this isn't our finished painting right now. This is just blocking in those big shapes. So I'm going to go pretty similar to the sky color, but this time we're going to go a little bit darker. So I have both of my blues and white. And now this distant, remember, whenever you're doing distance in a landscape, you want to be sure that as you go back into the distance, you get lighter, you get cooler, and you get more neutral with your color. So we don't want a super blue back there. We want to keep it neutral. And so the way you neutralize a color is we go back to the old color wheel that we all know so well. And what we do is we go across the color wheel to find our complementary color. So if I have a blue and I'm trying to neutralize it a little bit, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of orange. If I'm trying to neutralize a red, I'm going to add green, violet, yellow. You get the idea. So that's what I'll do to this blue, is I want to add a little bit of orange. Now, of course, I don't have a mixed orange on my palette, but we know that orange is made from yellow and red. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of yellow and a tiny bit of red. And that will really neutralize that color. I'll show you how much that neutralized that color. Do you see how gray that is as opposed to the first one there? Now I need that lighter, and I'm also, it's maybe a little bit too neutral for me. I'm just going to add a touch, I think, of my phthalo, because this is an ocean scene. So I'm getting more of those cool blue oceany colors than I would maybe in a forest scene or a scene out on the in the countryside. So let's see if I like that color. Now remember that when you're mixing your colors, you always want to check the color that you've chosen on your palette, not just on your painting, not just on your palette. And the reason for that is the color is always going to interact with the other colors on your painting, and it's going to look different. So a color can look very different on your palette than it does on your painting. So always check against your painting, not just on your palette, and that will help you. So again, all we're doing is big flat shapes now. I'm not doing detail or interest. And you know, you can choose any shape of those background mountains that you feel like or that you like. Just start tuning into what you enjoy and what you look at and you think, oh, I like that. And that's really the key, is just putting down something that makes you happy, because that's why we're doing this, right? And this whole painting endeavor is about enjoying yourself and having fun. So now we're going to move into these background trees here. And for those of you that joined a little bit later, this will be recorded, so you'll be able to come back and watch it later. So no worries there. So what I did there is I'm looking for a green, and again, this green is in the distance. So it's going to be what? It's going to be lighter, cooler, and more neutral than what you might have in the foreground. So I started with some ultramarine blue and just added some of my Hansa yellow to that. I'm going to lighten it up a little bit because we know it's in the distance, so it's going to be lighter. Now I'm going to test that color and see what I've got. Now that's not bad, but it is looking a little bit warm, more chromatic. Chromatic meaning rich in color, more close to the tube color. So because this is in the distance and I want it to set back, I know I want it a little bit bluer. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. And I want it more neutral. And again, to neutralize, the complementary color to green is red. So I'm going to add just a tad bit of red. And what red you are adding depends on how light the color is as far as my palette goes. So because this is a fairly light color that I'm mixing, I'm going to use my lighter red. So let me try that again. It's still looking a little bit warm to me, so I'm going to add some more blue. And ultramarine blue, if you're using that, you're going to use more ultramarine blue than you would if you're using the phthalo blue that's on the palette. And the phthalo, because the phthalo blue is a lot more staining, it's a lot stronger pigmented color, and so it really tends to take over a mix. So I'm testing that. Now that's a nice neutral bluish green, and I'm liking that. So I'm going to just block in this area. You know, notice I'm just using big blocky shapes. I'm not putting any detail. I'm just getting my idea of what these colors are going to be, and all of these back here are going to be the same tree line back there. And remember, with acrylics we'll just be painting over. Now I'm going to show you real quickly, one thing that I don't really want back there is harsh edges, sharp edges. I don't want to create a ridge between these blocks of paint. So I'm going to rinse off my brush real well. Make sure that you get the paint out of the ferrule of the brush. That's this area right down there where the bristles go into the metal part. So you rinse that off and you pat it dry. And then while this paint is still wet, you can just, or slightly damp anyway, you can just brush against it. And you notice I'm keeping my brush very flat and horizontal to the canvas. If I do it like this at this point, you see how that just picks the paint up? And if you don't want it to pick the paint up, you're just trying to to soften the edge there, then hold your brush more horizontally to the canvas, and that will work better. So I put some of that blue back in there because I got rid of most of it. But you'll use that technique of blending a lot. I just wanted to show that to you right there. So that's a big shape that we're putting in. And the next very large shape, let's go ahead and put this blue color in. So, you know, you could go a lot of different colors. I went very blue with this one. That ocean is going to be, well, water is just so fun to paint because it's like a multitude of reflective surfaces, depending on whether it's lifting or troughing or whatever it's doing, it's going to reflect a different surface. And then when you're looking down on it more, you're going to see the bottom underneath the water. So it's just a very complex thing, but it's a lot of fun to paint. But what I'm just going to do is mix up another blue, and this one is primarily the Pthalo Blue, but I want to neutralize it. So neutralizing blue, I'm going to use orange. And again, I don't have a mixed orange, so I'm using a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red, because those combined make orange. So I want to just see if I can get some kind of a color that I might like for the ocean. That's gone too yellow, so I'm going to add some ultramarine black back into it. It was mostly phthalo before, but now I'm adding some ultramarine. And the phthalo is going to give you a real pure, clear color, and the ultramarine is going to muddy up the color a little bit and warm it up. So I tested it there, and it's a little dark. So I'm going to add more white to it and see if I like that. It's pretty neutral right now, but I'm keeping to kind of neutral colors in this painting, which isn't like me, I know, but you know, you gotta step out of the box every once in a while. So what I'm focusing on is the value. And if you look at your reference and you squint your eyes to take out all the detail, you can kind of see the relative values. And I'm seeing when I'm looking at that I've gone too dark. So here's another way you can mix in. I just took some white and I mixed it straight into the paint that was still wet on the canvas, and I can mix it together that way. All right, so that's not too bad. I like that value better. One thing you have to remember and think about when you're painting with acrylics is that they dry darker. So if when you put that color down it's exactly right, then you know you need to go a little bit lighter. So my saying is, if it looks too light, it's just about right. So be sure and think about that, and you'll notice it because as it dries, it darkens up, and then you go, oh yeah. So I'm just filling that in a big flat shape, and we'll come back after this and do all our detail work and add interest to it. I'm going to brush off a little bit of that paint, and the reason is I'm just using my paper towel and real lightly brushing it. One, I don't want it to get too thick, and two, I want that little bit of yellow to sparkle through there a little bit, just for fun. Okay, so we've got that value in, and now we're going to move to, let's do this sand color. That's the next big color. So I'm going to start with my Indian yellow here, and I'm going to add white to it. And again, I want to neutralize this color, and this is a yellow, so I would neutralize it with purple. I don't have a mixed purple on here, but what I do have is a little bit of blue and a little bit of red, and those combined make purple, right? And you know, you can see the red is a lot more taking over than the yellow did, and so I went completely orange, but that's okay because I need a lot of this paint, so I'm just going to add more ultramarine blue to that. And it's a fairly light color. Now I've got a color that's very neutral, tannish color like that, which isn't bad. It's, you know, not bad at all. I think I'm trying to stay more neutral with this one. So I think I'm going to stay with that neutral, just get it into my right value, and then I can add some interesting accent colors to it later from that neutral base. So see if I like, I have to go just a little bit warmer, a little bit yellower. Can't do it. It's too brown. Let's see if I like that. It's almost not even brown. That one's looking a little bit purple, and that is because it's against this yellow. It looks much more yellow on the palette than it does against the yellow. And I know a lot of that yellow is going to be covered up, so I don't have to worry about it too much. But let's just get this down here. I'm squinting again. There's going to be areas along the water that are darker, and then areas up that are lighter on this sand. It's going to have a lot of different variations of value and color to make it interesting. But for right now, we're just going to fill it in sort of the in-between value, the value that is closest. And I'm softening up those edges, keeping them nice and soft. Thinking about, you know, I want to cover, but I'm going to let some of this yellow come through a little bit and see how we like that. Adding white, I added a little more white to it because, again, it was looking like about the right value. And so if it's looking like the right value, it's going to be too dark when it dries. And that's especially true with your lighter colors. They shift the most as they dry. So again, don't worry about the color being exactly right. Just mix up an approximate, and then let's get these big shapes in there. But the value, you want to get it light enough so that when you squint, you see that same shift between in value between the ocean and the sand. Of course, along here we're going to have darker sand and lighter water, so it creates this area that blends more. But we'll work with this right now. Okay, I want to do the rocks, and the rocks are going to be very similar. They're going to have a bunch of different colors, but I think for now I'll just add a little bit more blue to that, just to get these rock shapes blocked in. I'm kind of still playing with the idea of this rock and where I want it to be. I don't want it to be smack in the middle, and it's not smack in the middle, so that's okay. And over here we're going to have some rocks. Just putting down some paint real quickly. And back here, about the same value, we're going to have this background, but I'm going to add a little bit of Indian yellow to that, just so I can remember that this area behind is like a field back there, or like a golden field or something that's back there. And then over here we've got that going on. Up here, see, this is all just a really similar value, but we're just getting these blocks in. Okay, so in the rock area, I want it to go a little bit darker. So I'm going to add, basically, since this is a neutral, I'm just going to add a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of blue. And I use the Alizarin, the Indian yellow, and the ultramarine. Now I'm going to use more of the Indian yellow because that's looking very red, and I don't want something that's red. And then I'm going to use more blue because I want it more gray, more neutral, just a little bit darker. So that's kind of Not too bad. There's going to be some of this color down at the bottom, but it's too brown. So brown is a variant of orange. So in order to neutralize an orange, you're going to add more blue to it. So I'm going to add a little more ultramarine blue to that color, and then I'm going to add some white because the blue will darken the color down and we don't want it any darker. So that's a more neutral color. Now these rocks are going to have both light and dark on them, but that gives us an idea of where we're going. And I'm going to put this dark over here on this side of the rock because that's going to have some of that on there as well. And then we're going to have a few rocks down here. I just want to remember that they're going to be in this area because we're going to have to work on the sand underneath them, but let's just put a little bit of this dark down. There's going to be some rocks down here along the edge, and that gives us sort of some of that dark color going on. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to work on here is this last little area of dark green trees that we've got going on there. So I'm going to choose some of my ultramarine blue and some Indian yellow, and we're going to get a dark green going on here. Now I didn't choose the Pthalo Blue because it's going to be a brighter blue. Let me show you how a mixed green goes with Pthalo Blue versus the ultramarine blue. The Pthalo Blue is a lot brighter, and so it's going to make a much brighter green. So if I mix the Pthalo and the Hansa yellow medium, I get this kind of bright, vivid green, and you can see how that compares to the green that I made with the ultramarine blue and the Indian yellow. It's just much brighter. But most of the things you're going to be doing in a landscape painting generally, you're going to want those more muted colors if you're going for a more natural look. So we're going to go with this green made from the ultramarine blue for this dark area of trees in here. And I'm just going to start filling those in with that ultramarine blue, and it's picked up a little bit of that yellow that was underneath it there on the palette too, and it's lightened that up a little bit. So, but we'll just go with that. We want this area to be more chromatic than the trees behind it, more vivid in color, and a little bit darker, and that will make it come forward in the painting versus being more in the background, like the background trees. So let's go a little bit bluer. I think, there's a lot of blue in this landscape, and I think the trees are generally going to be bluer. You could also go much more neutral with these trees, even have them be hardly green at all. It's up to you really, and up to how you like your colors to come across on the painting. I'm kind of notorious for having brighter colors than are really natural. Let's go right across there. Some of this dark comes across the bottom, but still leaving some of that background field showing up above there. Just gives you a little peekaboo through to the background. So then we got pretty much all of our basic block-in shapes in, and we're comparing, again, looking for the values and comparing one area to the next, the sky to the mountains and the ocean to the sand, and getting those values. You want to look at it from a distance and really start evaluating your shapes right now. So I'm looking at those shapes of the ocean versus the sand, and because I had to change the way the canvas is a different shape, I'm ending up with sort of half and half water and half sand, which isn't really what I want. You really want to think more in terms of 1/3, 2/3 versus half and half. It's going to just give you a better outcome on your painting, make it look more interesting. So I'm going to mix up some more of this water blue to reshape my water. Now you could have gone more sand than water, but in my case, I just think I want more water than sand. So again, I've got, this time I'm using the Pthalo Blue because it's giving me that more blue-green color that I want to the ocean, my Indian yellow, and of course some white that I'm adding to that to get to the right value. So get that paint out of the ferrule there, smush that against the canvas so you don't get that paint building up right at the edge of the bristles right there. So let's give this mixture a try, and we always test it up on our canvas, and we can see that that's much too dark still, so I'm going to add white to that color, and it's also a little too neutral. I'm going to add back in some of my Pthalo Blue, and so that I can get a little bit closer to the color that I had starting out there. More white. Remember, you always have to push it a little bit lighter when you're trying to match colors. And you can see it's still a little dark, even though on the palette it looks pretty darn close, but always got to check it against what's already on your painting. So you just keep on adding white till you get the right value. And we're just going with a similar color. Doesn't have to be exact at this point. We'll have a bunch of different colors in this area before we finish. So that was about the right color, so I added a little bit more white in order to get to where I want it to be. So now I'm reshaping, bringing that shape out. You remember we want to go more flat in the distance, more horizontal in the distance, and then you can round out when you come back towards the center, back towards the foreground. You can round it out a little bit, and that'll just read a little bit better and more in perspective. So yeah, so that gives me a little better shape, more water, but I also want to think about the actual shape I'm making along the edge there. You don't want it to be too straight. I finish filling this in here, add a little more white because that's too dark. So yeah, you can add it, as long as it's still wet, you can add it right there on the canvas to lighten that up. But now let's fix this edge. It's just a little too even, and I want it to have more ins and outs to it to give it more of a natural look along the edge. Right there. And that's about right. This will be, by now, your top sky, that's called sky, is probably pretty dry. And so we can move back into the sky and then move forward in the painting again. This time just refining our colors, refining what's going on there, and getting a better finish on the painting. So you'll find, and the thing is, in the distance there, we're not going to have very much detail. It's going to be pretty low detail in the back because it's far away. So we don't have to worry about that too much. But we really want to work on the sky now. I don't know if you can tell, but it dried with a lot of the yellow coming through. And I don't want that much yellow coming through, I don't think. So I'm going to stay right here in my blue pile. I'm just going to add more white to it. So you kind of notice that I always set my palette up the same way with the paints, nice big blobs of paint on the side to work from. And then in my mixing area, I kind of stick to, so this is a blue pile, this is a green pile, this is a neutral pile, and you kind of just shift the colors of those piles from one to the other, wherever you need it to go. If you need a nice bright clear color, then you're going to have to start a fresh spot on your palette. But mostly it's not. Okay, so we've got that. I'm doing sky. I know this needs to be really light, and this is actually a pretty dark area. So I'm going to move over a little bit so that because I would have had to add a whole bunch of white to that pile in order to get the whole pile light enough. But if I just use a little bit of that mix and then come over and add more white, I can get away with it. Okay, again, too neutral for me. So I'm going to add a little, I'm adding Pthalo Blue now. I'm being wild and crazy. and adding Phthalo Blue and some white, because adding that phthalo is going to darken it. Every once in a while, it helps to just wipe your brush off. Again, getting that excess paint out of the ferrule of your brush so that you can keep a clean stroke. So let's see if I like that color. Yeah, I think I like that color. It needs to be lighter, and I'm going to add just a tad more blue. And then in this area, now that we've finished our block in, we're moving into our finishing stages. It's really becomes subjective as to how bright you want the colors, how neutral you want the colors. You know, really at the ocean, especially in Oregon, the colors tend to be really, really neutral. So it's totally up to your own artistic eye as to how neutral you want that. So I was having trouble getting that light enough, so again I moved over completely over to a new pile to get it even lighter. And I do want it bluer, so I'm gonna find that color I want. Part of the problem is it's because it's working up against this yellow, and so it's looking even more neutral. So I've got pretty much yellow and phthalo blue here going on, and it's still looking neutral. That's okay. A lot of times with sky, I'll just put in that color up at the top, and then I'll come in with some straight white. I'm going to take a moment and squeeze out some more white, because you can see how dirty my white's getting there, and it makes it really hard to get a clean color. So don't hesitate to stop and give yourself some nice clean color. All right. Okay. So if I take the white to put along the bottom and blend that in, you see that's still wet. So you see how it's blending in. It's lightening up that upper color a little bit and giving me a shift to a lighter horizon line. So it's starting with a little bit of straight white, and especially because I have that yellow under there. The yellow is influencing the white. Normally I don't use pure white because it's too chalky, but because I got that yellow under there, it's warming up that white just a tad, which is working for me right now. So blended it together, so you got a nice blend. Something on my canvas, a nice even blend, and we may have to adjust that a little bit later, but for now I just want a nice quiet sky going on up there. And then again, moving into the hills, I've got these slightly darker mixed blues over here. Just going to add a little ultramarine to them because they're sort of blue-green right now. And some white. I can use my dirty white now because I'm doing a more neutral color. I'm not trying to get a clear blue. So see how that looks a little bit darker? So I need to add a little bit more light white to it. And because I'm trying to stick within that value that I already established in the block in. So if I put this down, and that one looks pretty much exactly the same value as the dried paint, so I'm going to add a little more white because it needs to look, if I want to match that value, it needs to look a little bit lighter than what you've got down there, because then it's going to dry darker. So here, you know, I'm just thinking, what are these hills going to look like? Where's, you know, I want them kind of uneven. I don't want them to look real. I don't want them to look symmetrical. I just want some interesting shapes up there. You want to be careful not to, it's something about our brains wants to follow the shapes below. So there's going to be a real tendency for you to put a mountain that's kind of in the same shape as this shape that we've established here. And you want to avoid doing that. Mirroring of the shape below kind of idea. So I've just got a little bit of that down. Now something you can do for distant mountains, just to give them a little bit of a sense that there's something going on back there, is I can take and add just a tiny, tiny bit of yellow. I used Indian yellow, which is a more neutral yellow, and a tiny bit of white. Mix up a color that's just ever so lighter and warmer than the color you have down. And then you can think about the way the light would be shining. I'm just using a really overhead light right now, so there's no real directional way that the light is coming. So it would just be hitting the tops of peaks. So if I just real lightly go in, keeping my brush very, very flat, and it'll kind of skip over the canvas, you can just add, especially along the tops there, you can just come in and add a little bit of interest. It makes it look like there's hills coming forward. Maybe there's some little bit of trees somewhere, but it's far enough away that I don't want to add like really obvious tree shapes. I just want to soften that top edge and have this really subtle change in the color back there. And it shows up, but it's just kind of fun. Anyway, so I added a little bit more light and a little bit more yellow, just to have one more layer of that, interest. Just tapping my brush here and there. Just gives a feeling like there's, anyway, I already said that, repeating myself. Okay. You can also rinse your brush. Dry it a little bit, and see where here I've got kind of a sharp edge going on. So I'm just gonna lightly run my brush over that to soften that edge up. You got to be careful because the sky is still wet, depending on your paint, depending on your canvas, depending on how moist your air is. All these things will affect how dry that is, but that's all. I just wanted that softened back there. Okay, so we're a little softer now. We're going to move into these trees, and this is just a tree line way back there. So whenever we're starting with tree lines, we're going to think in terms of the shadow, medium, and light. So whenever you're creating form in anything, you're going to have if you just do one flat shape, it's going to be, it's going to look flat if it's just one color. So, but if you add some darker and some medium and some light, then you can start describing a three-dimensional shape. And it doesn't have to be really exact. You're not really doing anything exact, but if you have those three colors in there, it creates texture and form and shape in what you're doing. So what do I have here? I have Ultramarine Blue. I'm going to make up a good amount of this because there's lots of greens that we're going to be playing with. Just starting in your green pile there. Ultramarine Blue, and I'm using some of my Hansa yellow medium, and that's going to give me that color there, which is, since we're working back here, that's too dark and too chromatic. So let's get our right value. Again, this is much like we did when we were doing the block in, and that's the thing with acrylic paints, is paint color mixing is just a huge aspect of getting a naturalistic scene, with acrylic paints. So still not light enough, right? Because we're using our block in as our roadmap, so we know where we're going, we don't get lost. So it needs to be lighter. Okay, and that almost blends in exactly. So what does that mean? It means I need to go a little bit lighter, right? Too light is just right. Okay, get some of this excess paint off of there. Now the color is the right value, but it's too green. So I want it a little more neutral. I'm going to add a little bit of red to it. Be careful with that red because it can quickly go too much. It's just a tiny, tiny bit you're using. Now I also want it bluer than that. Remember, things get bluer as they go into the distance. Bluer and more neutral. And because I added that blue, which is darker, I need to add white back in to get back to my right value. Okay, so that's pretty similar to what we had. But now, so that's our kind of medium tone. Now we're going to take some blue into an edge of that and make some that's a little bit bluer than that color. And that's what we want to use along the base. Thinking about this rock, you can kind of define the shape of the rock as you hit that edge. And I'm just laying down something back there. When you're still doing dark, medium, and light in the distance, but you're doing it in a much tighter range. So up here in the midground or the foreground, the shift between dark and light is going to be much greater. But when you're working in the background like this, you're still going to have a shift, but it's going to be very narrow. The further back you go, the more narrow that shift is going to get between dark and light. So that's just something to think about. And what I'm going to do at this point, because I'm working in a real small area back there, is I'm going to move to my slightly smaller brush. It's still a flat brush. I like to use flats or brights because it gives you more variation. You can use the corners, you can use the edge. Just gives you a variation of brush strokes to use. But I know I want some little bit smaller shapes back there, so that's why I'm moving to that lighter brush. So, and another trick is to hold your brush like this versus like a pencil, and that gives you a more painterly brush stroke. Keeps you from getting too tight. The whole thing with this all is you have more fun if you're looser in your painting and you don't get too tight. So back here, we're going to see a little bit of these trees poking up. This is the Oregon coast, so these are all evergreen pine type fir trees or pine trees or something back there. So by just putting my flat brush on the side and pushing upwards, I can create little spiky things that look like they might be the tops of trees. You want to again try to stay really loose with it and not get too tight. Taking that same color and adding some more blue to it. So again, staying within my value range, but shifting up my color a little bit. Gonna make sure that blue is all mixed in so I don't get those little dots of very dark color. Because if you do that, if you have a dark way in the back, it's just gonna jump everything forward. And you don't want that. So again, staying within a very, very narrow range of color, of value, but just shifting colors a little bit here and there. More white, more blue. You notice every time I go back to my palette, I almost never use the exact same color. I'll just mix a little bit of some other colors in there. Using the flat of my brush. Now I'm going to come back to some of this lighter color. So I'm just kind of getting these little organic shapes. You notice I'm flipping my brush around using the edge, using the flat, just using the corner. That just gives me all kinds of different little shapes to work from. And I tend to just kind of get really caught up in this. I enjoy seeing those fun little shapes emerge and the slight subtle color differences. One thing I don't like is the fact that this line has gotten really, that's just a kind of a strong line there. So I think I still have some of my mountain color a little close to it. So what I did was I came back in with my mountain color because I just feel like this needs to have a little more, be not quite so straight across. So I'm coming in and taking some mountain color and giving myself some variation, blending that. Just so it's not such a straight line, and you probably can hardly see that. I don't know if that helps, but you can see that by just adding a little variation, it makes it feel a little bit more neutral, more natural. Words are so hard. Okay. Now, I think what I'm going to do, because doing this water is going to take us a few layers to work on that. So I think what I want to do is go back to my slightly larger brush. Whenever you're using a larger area, you want to move to a larger brush. And I want to start getting some of those layers in, because we've got a darker blue into some medium blues. We've got a few values of light blue in here, and then we've got these areas where there's a bluish grayish neutral color where the water is running very shallow. Anyway, so we've got lots of colors to work with there, so I just kind of want to start putting some of those layers down so I can see where I'm going. That's just straight phthalo blue there that I put into that pile of the mountain color that I was already using. So it's gonna already have some mixed colors in there. Now I'm adding some ultramarine blue to it. This is gonna be too dark probably, but what I want to do is just get a few little bit of darker things going on. And at this point you want to try to stay really loose. If you're going to hold your brush like this, at least hold it very loose in your hand, so you don't get too tight. And then just quickly add some white to that and blend that in. Well, that's an interesting color, but it's pretty warm. I think I want that to have a little more yellow in it because, well, ocean, right? It has more kind of blue-green colors. And this is where I love color, and I especially love these blue-green colors. So there's no way in the world I'm going to stay as neutral as an ocean really generally is. So you guys stay neutral. That's all right. You do you, and it'll all work out in the end. Okay, I'm going to add, so I'm real randomly placing these colors just to start getting an idea. And as I go lighter, I'm also going to add a little Indian yellow to that as the water gets shallower. It's probably going to start looking like somewhere in the Caribbean or something instead of the Oregon coast, but that's okay. Sometimes you go to the coast, and if it's been stormy up here, the water is just a brackish, neutrally gold brown color. Kind of like baby shit brown, you know that color. Not pretty. Okay, so what I can do, I'm starting to get a lot of edges in there. So I'm going to rinse off my brush. Rinse off your brush, get most of the water out, and then real lightly go across this. And you can notice I'm using like the tip of my brush now because I want to move the paint a little bit. And that the tip of the brush just gives you more like forcefulness to you can scrub it where it's started to dry a little bit more. And by doing this, I'm just getting rid of all those edges. for this layer, I just want to keep everything really soft edged. So I haven't really started making. Oh, I really like that darker blue, but I don't like the way it's kind of all in one. It's spread out. It's like I want more big shapes. So I want more like darker in this big area. Like that. Again, I'm not putting a lot of paint on the canvas. I'm keeping it pretty it pretty thin. Rinsing off, drying it, and then softening my edges. So I have more of a feeling of there's darker blue in the center where it's deeper, maybe out here, and then in the edges, lighter, thinner, making sure I got enough paint right on the edge, the ridge of my canvas there. Anyway, okay, so that just kind of gives us, starts giving us a an idea over there. Now let's put some trees in. Switching back to my smaller brush. Actually, let's put some rocks in. Okay, so a dark, we're going to make a dark. That's made from Alizarin Crimson. I'm just going to use this neutral area to do it. Alizarin Crimson, Pthalo Blue, less blue than red, and Indian Yellow. So all three primaries, red, yellow, blue, is going to make you some sort of neutral, and then you have to just adjust from there. By that I mean if I add a little white to it, I can see what color this is actually going to, and it's actually leaning a little bit towards green, and I'm going to lean a little bit towards red. But to get rid of that green, I'm going to add red because that's a complementary color. That gets me back to a straight neutral. Be sure to add that red into my whole pile there. I'm going to test that and see what color we got going on. So that's nice and dark, and it's very neutral. And you can stay there, or you can push that whichever direction you want. I tend to like my very darkest darks to lean towards purple or red. It's just the way my eye works, but yours can lean whichever direction you want, or they can just stay straight neutral. Your choice. Okay. All right, so here we got some very dark, probably too dark, but I'm putting a little bit of it over on that rock. There's going to be some of it here. Just playing with my darkest darks to see. This area here is in the foreground is where you're going to see your darkest darks. So you always want your darks to diminish as they go back into the distance. And that tells the eye that that's distance. So if that's the darkest dark right there in the foreground, then I'm going to go ahead and lighten it up a little bit for my darks back here. I don't want anything quite as dark as that. And that having that there then gives you something to refer to. So down along the bottom of these rocks, there's a little bit, I'm just adding a little bit of random dark shapes in there. There's going to be dark along the bottom of this rock. Maybe there's something here. You know, your rock can be shaped however you like. And what we're going to do then is come back over the dark with our lighter colors. So we're kind of defining our shapes with the dark, and then we'll come back with lighter colors over the top. And here there's a big area of driftwood and rocks and things that have tumbled off of this cliff and come down into the water's edge. Connect your shapes. Don't try not to go polka dot, polka dot, polka dot, polka dot, polka dot. You know, you want to connect your shapes more like I did here versus having separate little polka dots. It just looks more natural that way. So Here's some dark. Just getting some, establishing some dark a little bit. Okay. And then, well, since we've got that neutral, let's go ahead and to one side of it, I'll keep some of that color there. Don't get rid of it entirely. I'm going to add some white to it. I'm going to add some Indian yellow to it, which is just a little bit more neutral of a yellow, just to get a lighter color. And I'm going to start thinking about how big is this rock going to be and what colors. Again, we'll come over this again with lighter colors yet, dark, medium, and light, right? But think about the sun hitting from the top and hitting the rock. So think about the shape of that rock and where the sun's going to be hitting. Maybe there's an area of it here that comes out towards us. So it's got another like shelf that's coming down in there. There's maybe some little bit of light hitting on this side. This side's getting some shadow because it's got all these trees around it. And we're getting some light. So just varying up these shapes, getting something interesting. Maybe there's some of these rocks are coming right out into the water. Maybe I'll put this dark down in here. So some of these, there's some rocks coming right out into the water. So go through on your rock shapes now and add this medium tone. Again, don't worry about it. Experiment with your shapes and see what you like, because you can come back over it dozens of times until you're happy. Adding white and adding yellow. You always want to add yellow when you add the white. So adding some color, looking at these rocks, adding some, this is our medium tone, right? So we'll have dark, medium, and light. Tops of the rocks, they'll be in shadow over here, but they're probably still going to get some of this medium color. Now the other thing about it is, with rocks, is they come in very many colors, right? They're very seldom all the same. We haven't done, I'm not going to do too much here because we haven't done the sand yet. We're going to be putting those rocks on top of the sand, so I'm not going to do too much there. But what I'm going to do is, okay, I want to shift up the color a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue. And that's going to, bring it more a little sort of grayer. And since blue is a darker color, I'm going to add some white back in. So now see, I can get some variation in my grays. And you want that. You don't want your grays, you don't want them all the same color. They're your neutrals. They're not really gray. And then I'm going back, so I'm going to add even more. Let's add some white, add some yellow to it. Ooh, that got quite yellow. I might like that. So let's think about tops more. Notice how I move my brush around. I change the direction of it, so you don't get brush strokes that are all the same. You don't get the same shape of a brush stroke. And I'm not drawing, I'm painting. So I'm just laying the paint on the canvas, letting the canvas pull off a little bit of the paint, and I'm just laying a brush stroke and moving on. You don't want to paint the paint. You don't want to pet it. You don't want it like this over and over and over in the same. You don't want to really carefully define, and then just let those brush strokes speak for themselves. If you get the color, the value, the shape, the edge, then you're golden. So we're just letting that speak for itself. I want to get something that's just kind of really yellow with a tiny bit of red in it, just to get something really warm in there, here and there. So that was Indian yellow with just a little bit of red in it. Rocks are so fun because you can really just go crazy and put all kinds of fun colors in them. And you can go add even a little bit more red to that. And some more white to that. Get something that's almost pinkish. That's fun. Try to stay with, so this is our light areas. So within the light area, you want to stay in that same value, but you can just shift the color. Okay, and we want to go even lighter. Let's see if we can get some of these really light colors. Top, it's going to be lighter. I think I'm going to shift this one a little more to the yellow than the red. So it's just shifting. You're shifting those color piles as you go. Okay, so maybe there's an area then here that's a little lower. Go there. Touches here. Try to connect your shapes so you don't have polka dots. So the nice thing about it is we can do this and then we can come back, let that dry for a while and look at it and decide if we like it or not. We've got a big rock face over here. So there's these big shapes that I want to kind of try to get in there. Don't worry if you don't like it at first, but just put it in and see how it goes. Let it rest for a little bit. Adding blue to that, like I say, always adding. When you go back, shift your color a little bit. That gets, you know how nature has all these little tiny shifts going on. It's never just one flat color. So get some warmer, some cooler. In this light area, add a little more white to that, cooler. Get some big areas and then some smaller areas. I like to squint my eyes a lot when I'm doing this. If you squint your eyes, you'll get the detail going away so you can see what you're doing a little better. This lighter stuff is a good sand color, so I'm just blending out those bottoms with that. I can see that I want to come in back with some of that blue, that dark, and I can see that I want it bluer. Not super dark, but some of the darker color, shadow color. Play with that a little bit, touching it here and there. Now my paint's starting to get really thick, and so I'm pulling paint off the canvas at this point. So I'm going to have to let that dry and think about it. But you can see how you can just play with these until something looks interesting. Oh, but the point was, I think I stopped halfway through that sentence. Step back from your painting. Things that look terrible close up, even if you just do it this much, but hopefully set it up somewhere and really step back so that you can see where it's going, because it makes a big difference. A little bit of a light right in front. Okay, I'm going to stop. Ooh, that put some red in there. I like that. Okay, I'm going to stop that part because it's getting really wet and thick. So let's go back to our slightly bigger brush and do some more in this sand area. We've got all these nice neutral colors. Add some more white to it. And now we're moving in really horizontal. Ooh, this looks like a good warm, like wetter sand color. It's a little darker. Start playing with that. See, I'm just gonna be adding variations now, and I'm also going to be thinking of the gradation. So something really important to remember in a space like this, and the same thing we're doing with the water. In order for it not to look like it's standing up like a wall, you need a gradation from the back into the front. So you need it to be lighter, bluer, more neutral, and then as it comes forward, you can have it be warmer and more chromatic and have more edges. So it's important to have a gradation. And it doesn't really matter what the gradation is. But it needs to gradate, or else it'll look like it's standing up. So back here, we're going to stay really light. I'm going to add a little more blue to that, just for fun. And so we get something a little bluish, a little neutral. We're going to see how we like that. I'm barely touching the canvas with the edge of my brush and giving these horizontal strokes to give me some variety of color back there. I like this neutral light color for back here, which is the far side of these the water going back behind the rock. I'm going to leave that one a little more yellow because it's more like a field. Okay, some of this. Now I know I need to gradate. Once you get past this plane, this distance, and now we're starting to come forward, then I need to gradate. So I need to add some yellow to that, pull in some of my neutral to neutralize it, and see what I like, if I like that color. Well, that's pretty cool. It's a little warmer. It's really quite neutral. Now when I'm getting up into this foreground too, you notice my shapes were really thin and long back there, but now when I'm getting up into this area, they're going to be flatter and bigger. Going over those rocks, we need to get our sand established before we finish with those rocks. Okay, that's another area of color. Now I'm getting much closer, so I'm gonna switch the color again, right? Get more chromatic. Here's some yellow. Let's add a little bit of red to that. Let's see what we've got in here. That's some nice chromatic color. Maybe especially around these rocks, you get some of this darker color. And I don't want to go very far back with that dark color because that then gives me my distance. That I can lighten it up. I can take that color, that same color, and lighten it up, and then continue back a little bit. And again, whenever you add titanium white to a color, you're also neutralizing it, cooling it down a little bit. Sorry, not neutralizing it, cooling it down a little bit, which is good, which is what we want in the distance in this situation. Got too much white in there. Rinsing my brush, tapping it dry, and then I'll blend that white in. So, okay, so we've got that going on. We're starting to get some color shift going on. Blending those colors together. That's pretty good. And in this foreground then, but one thing I like to do too is blend in. Let's take some of our sky blue is completely dried up now, but I'm gonna start mixing up some blues, put another layer on the ocean there. So Ultramarine Blue, Pthalo Blue, white, let's see what kind of color we've got going on. That's a very warm blue. That's kind of interesting. I like that. I'm going to real lightly run some of that over here. Why? I don't know, because I like that color. Okay, it's too chromatic though for what we're doing in this picture. So, orange neutralizes blue. Orange is yellow and red. Tiny bit of red. That red really takes over. I just use the corner of my brush, and I'll use a palette knife to mix if I'm mixing a whole bunch of paint of one color, but in general, it just is too slow when you're painting with acrylics. You kind of just have to mix with your brush, or you'd be there all day. Okay, that's a little bit more neutral color. I like that. Again, I'm going to be thinking the same way, where I need a gradation back to front. So back here in the back, I'm going to add more white to part of this, so I get my cooler, lighter version of that blue. So let's come in here, thinking about this water coming up. This is a long, shallow area of water, so it's not going to have big waves coming into it. So I'm not thinking too much about those big shapes. I'm just thinking about the undulations kind of, and the eddies and the swirls in the water. So adding some of that back there, but not covering up all that undercolor. And for variety, what am I going to do? I'm going to add a little bit, maybe a little bit of yellow and white. Why? Because you need that variety. You don't want one flat color. Adding a little bit of slightly green or blue in there. And right along this edge, then I'm going to go quite a bit lighter. I just taken the white, and the paint that's on my brush is going to give me something lighter, but I also want this to get more neutral back there. So tiny bit of red, tiny bit of red, tiny bit of yellow. Let's get some color that's going to be kind of in between to go along that water line in the back. Give us a blending tone in between those two. Maybe just some of that going on back there, some lighter color. Really subtle. We want to keep it subtle. See if this is dry. It is, but we'll come back to that. We need to add some things down at the bottom there to blend those two colors together. But let's do our waters, because we've got that colors mixed up. So gradations, lighter back there. See what color this is. Okay. Bluer as we go forward. And again, in the back you can have those small, thin shapes, but as you come to the front, you don't want such small, thin shapes. You want bigger shapes. So press down on your brush and give yourself bigger brush strokes. Rinse and blend whenever. Rinse, dry off your brush. Too much water on there in order to blend. Okay. Moving forward, this area is really fun, where it gets really shallow. So what's going on there is that you're getting more yellow into the color that you were using, and more red, so it's a little more neutral, moving more towards that sand color. But it's darker than sand color. So let's see what we've got going on here. Something like that. We're going to get some color like this going on in areas. Back here. All right. Let's add more white to that. So we're getting, you don't want to go straight into the white water. You want to add lighter and lighter. So even where the water, like along here where there's like a little bit of a roller coming in and it's foaming up, probably going back at this point, it's not straight white. So you want to establish that shape with just a lighter blue color, but not white, and then you can come back over the top. So what I've got going on is, in this one, I'm thinking about that shape because the waves are going to come in a similar shape because the shape of it is because of the shape of the land, you know, so it's going to come in a similar shape. Remember, tighter down there and getting bigger as you come. Just thinking about this shape. Maybe it goes here, pulls away. While it's still wet, you can pull this back into the water a little bit. Soften that edge. The only edge you want to keep really is this forward edge. If you wiggle your brush a little bit, same thing back here. We've got a little bit wider along the edge, pulling back into it. Wherever the rocks are, you're going to have a little bit lighter edge, pulling it back, pulling it back. Those little streamers that go back in. Water's touching. So right on the edge you get that foam, and then it goes back. Added a little more white to that color, so you can go a little bit lighter, thinking about coming back in. Moving more and more horizontal with my brush, so it's almost flat to the canvas, so that because I'm getting thick paint, and that keeps you from losing the paint, pulling up the paint that's already on the canvas. So going really flat. A little bit lighter. We'll probably keep to those neutral colors back there in the very distance. I mean, they're not very light. And then we'll get lighter as we come forward. Now, as we get into these really light colors, I'm going to add a little bit. I think I'll use Indian yellow. It's not quite as bright. I'm just going to add just a touch of Indian yellow because I don't want it to get chalky white. Just using the brush on the tip of it and the flat of it and pulling it. Get those streamers going on. It's real shallow water. Up here, you can get a little more aggressive because you're going to have a little more brush strokes. Now, right along that edge, right, we've got two things. We've got some dark sand in there. So we've got our sand colors that are made from yellow and red, which is an orange, a bunch of white, and then blue added to go as neutral as we want. And adding this blue will also get us darker, which is what we want for sort of a dark sand color. So if we've got along the edge, we want to see that difference in value. So I'm going to add even more blue than that, so we get that dark wet sand along the edge, and that's going to come in under here too, a little bit. Let's go ahead and add more blue to that, to half of it. I'm going to add some Pthalo Blue and some Ultramarine Blue to it. I'm adding yellow and red because I got a little bit too blue. Keep it neutral. But what I'm doing is getting something in here where it's shallow, but it still has more blue in it than the dark sand does. Let's see what we got there. That's better. So I'm pulling some of this in. So I'm playing with these colors, going back to the red-orange sand color with some of it. So you got red-orange sand out here. Just going to get that edge that's always going to be a little darker. Don't worry about being exact. You can always come back. Maybe here it came up a little bit higher. We want more variation in the foreground. So that's one color. Here's this bluer color. Some of that, blend that in. Don't get too dark back here. You want to stay in this area and get these variations of color. Go lighter yet. In that brownish color, add a little bit of yellow, and we can move up onto the sand, blend, blend. Kind of fun. I think that in here, I get my bluer, darker. Oh, there's a bunch of red. Here's some yellow. Here's some blue. Red, yellow, and blue. This makes those neutrals. So I can get some areas where that's a slightly warmer one now that we're up more in the foreground. So maybe in here, that goes across there. I don't know. You just play with that and see where that goes in your mind. Come back with some light yellow. Ooh, I got so much of that red over there. I keep picking it up. Let's get a little bit lighter. There we go. That's some different color. Just creating variations. If you don't like a brushstroke you did, just do another one. If it starts getting gummy, which acrylics will do as they start to dry, just give it a rest and come back in a little while after it dries. It just takes it a minute or two. I'm mixing up some more water blue. Just going to neutralize it with some of those neutrals. See what color I've got there. It's kind of a very light blue, like that. I want to reestablish some of this. I'm coming with that light blue kind of across that sand there. I'm going to add yellow to it. Here I am. I'm going to add yellow to it because you know me, I cannot resist having some color. I added yellow and white, and that gave me sort of a blue-green. So I want to put this more blue-green color. You know, as the water lifts up and gets a little bit of sunlight coming through it, you start seeing more of the green colors in the ocean. So maybe back here, where it's a little deeper, I might see more of these greens. But it also gives me more color variation just right here in the foreground. See how that's starting to gum up? That's my sign to stop and come back later. I think I can get away with one more lighter shade to add to my forward moving, barely touching the canvas, barely touching the canvas. And that's pulling it off in these kind of interesting shapes. Dragging it back. In the foreground, you want to see more texture, more interest. So, a little bit more of that. That's pretty fun. Get that blue, go back a little bluer. You get that blue, you know, where the water has the wet sand. You get that reflection from the sky on there. So you get a little bit of blue. Something like that. Yeah, I can leave that for the moment. I could probably do something out there. That's looking pretty boring, but for now I'm going to leave it. It's kind of nice to have an area in the painting that's quiet, that isn't always, you don't always have busyness everywhere. So now we're dry enough back here in our rocks that we can finish up our trees. So I'm going to move to my smaller brush, start with some darker blue greens, 2 blues, a little bit of red for some neutralizing power. Let's start with this very blue-green and see what we got. Ooh, I like that blue-green color. It kind of ties in with the water too. So here we've got blue-green. Now, if you've got something like I've got going on here where your shape has got kind of like stair steps and it's too even, you can use this darker color to reshape that a little bit. Give yourself a shape you like that's a little more uneven, a little more natural looking. So I'm thinking about just having some dark along the bottom. While I've got this color, I'm just going to take an edge of it and put some, well, I've got it on my brush. So if I take some white and come over here, what I'm about here is I want to, something a little bluer along the bottom here, but it needs to be lighter. So I just added white to that color I was using. And I'm coming in with something back here to establish the base of these trees and give that a little more interest. But we need that neutrally color, almost like the sand. Soften that up. Notice I changed that shape a little bit, so it's back a little further here and then coming forward just to give that a little more softness. We want that to stay real quiet back there. We don't want it to grab your eye, but it's just kind of fading off into the distance. There's a little yellow to that for my, finish this yellow part up, and I can again vary my edge so it's not a straight line across. And we want that line to be very soft. We don't want that to be a harsh line, so we'll use that bluish green color to just really soften that up. Just brushing those two colors together lightly so that they blend together. We don't have any hard edges. Here too, we don't want hard edges. So wherever you see one, just soften it. And then that'll just stay blended right back into the distance where we want it to stay. Okay, we've got that green. And we've got, I see I'm going to have to fix here a little bit, but we'll come back when we got working with some blues. So we've got that that going on, and we've got that going. So we're going to do the rest of our trees. So we have that blue-green color there. Now I'm just going to I'm adding some Indian yellow to it and some white. So remember, just think dark, medium, and light. Whatever area it is, you need a dark, medium, light. Not of the same exact color though. You want to make sure your color shifts. And I'm doing warm, light, cool shadows. And you could do cool, light, warm shadows, but you know, most of the time it's warm, light, cool shadows. So we've got some, these again are kind of evergreen kind of trees. So I'm doing some shapes that are kind of pointy tipped to be like evergreen trees. Down in this foreground, you'd have a little bit something going on. Notice I'm not painting trees really, I'm just painting shapes. So I added a little bit of blue to the corner of that. That gives me an in-between color. And you can shift, if you're getting too tight, you can shift the way you're holding your brush. Be careful here that you don't have your tips of your trees end up right at the line of your mountains. So above or below, either one is fine, but you just don't want them kissing the edge. That's it. It draws the eye unnecessarily and just looks kind of confusing. So 3 different colors. That got too dark in there. I think it's catching my eye, so I'm gonna come over it a little bit. And I'll add a little bit more blue. Get something in between. So see, you just got all these different colors going on, and that makes it look like there's detail when there isn't really detail. So again, over here, just tips. You can push up to get something that looks like the tip of a tree. These are just the tops of the trees showing up. I'm going to go ahead, I was going back and forth with this, but I'm going to go ahead and go off the edge of this canvas. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the tip of one of those trees being right at the edge of the canvas or very near it. Remember when you when these are being framed, if you frame your painting, you're going to take up like 1/4 of an inch is going to come in from the frame, unless you use a floater frame, which is what I use, which actually the painting sits on top of the frame so you see the entire edge of the canvas, which is my preference. But just keep that in mind, because somebody might at some point frame it in a standard frame and you're going to lose 1/4 of an inch, or if you cut off that 1/4 of an inch, now all of a sudden you're going to be kissing the edge again. Alright, so I'm just getting some different shapes and different greens. I'm going to go ahead and add some yellow to that. And some white. Small. So again, dark, medium, light, right? And you can go as neutral or as bright as you want with these colors. You know, a lot of times, especially at the ocean, the colors all seem really muted. You could probably just use a neutral for these trees. They wouldn't really have to be green at all, but I like colors, so. And you see how using this more chromatic color against these more neutralized greens really pops them forward and pops those backward. So I'm going to keep these brighter greens in this foreground area. We've also got some greenery at the bottom of this rock outcropping here. So I'm just going to put some of that in randomly here and there. Maybe there's a little bit right here. Your choice. How much of that you want. Add a little bit of blue to that color. So every time I go back, I just change up the color a little bit. I'm going to keep these sort of more bright colors towards the center. When I'm going up here like this, I'm going to start getting less of a contrast going on. I still want some shape, but I'm not going to go as bright a green as I am down there, because I want to keep the eye going into the painting and not off the edge of the painting. Added some more yellow, some more white, just to give this a few things here just a little bit brighter. A lot of times when you do paint in acrylics, you'll find that you have to wait for it to completely dry and come back, and you often need to add one more layer of your lights because they just darken up. Just what they do. So just kind of mixing in different colors, adding blue, adding till I get something that makes me happy enough. So that's pretty good there. What I don't like is this strong contrast right here. So I'm going to do the same thing with these rocks. Neutralize the contrast a little bit. Bring those values closer together over at the edge so my eye's not jumping off the edge of the canvas. So I'm going to use red and yellow and blue. Coming back to my neutral. You guys are going to be good at mixing color by the time you're done. So getting kind of a neutral color and a more medium, closer to the value right there of the trees so that I don't, that's all. I just want to do that, pull some of this color in here so that whenever you put down a color, if it's, you know, you don't want to introduce a new color without adding it in other areas as well, because it'll feel isolated. All right, so that's kind of that there. We've got this area of sand pretty much where we want it to be, so we can just finish off these rocks. We've got some neutral going already. I'm going to add some blue to it and see what we've got. We need more white, a little more blue. We can go all kinds of neutral grays with these rocks, which is so fun. Again, I'm not going to paint rocks. I'm just adding different colors, different values. Give me something going on that feels like detail. I like these blue colors because they're going to be picking up, the rocks are going to be picking up the color of the ocean and the sky. It's going to be bouncing all around on this super reflective surfaces, the water. So I'm going to go even bluer. Get some even bluer colors in here because those flat surfaces, especially where they're wet, are really going to pick up some of that blue in the sky. And this was supposed to, I was going to bring these rocks out more. That's what that was. Okay, so a little blue, a little lighter, a little blue, a little lighter. Shapes going on. Vary your shapes. Watch out for polka dots. This area is in shadow, so that can stay darker. In fact, I think I'll go quite a bit bluer. See if I can get some. I need some dark back there, but it's feeling too dark in the value I've got it now that I've got all the other colors going on. So I'm gonna mix up something. Ooh, this one's more purple. Let's see if I like that. I like that. I like that purple in there. So you could play forever with the shape of your rock. Remembering getting light along the top surfaces. Light along top surfaces. That creates more shapes. It's kind of nice if you have a rock that you're actually following along with, but I'm just making this up. Okay, down here this is supposed to be a rock too, so I'm going to create dark, medium, and light there to get my shape going on. Oh, I like this lighter light, touching it here and there. If your rock is starting to look a little soft edged, kind of starts looking like a pile of poo, then just give yourself some stronger edges. You know, and a lot of times rock art outcroppings will go like that. You know, they'll be like it's lifted up, so there's horizontal kind of shapes that are going on. Anyway, playing with that, you can play with that forever. It's fun. Some of my paint in there. So this needs some lighter in here so that it's not got this sharp edges. Who knows what all this is? There's some driftwood. Maybe you can have some long shapes that look like driftwood. Be sure you don't get anything too contrasty right at the edge. You can bring some dark back in. This is that purpley color. Underneath. Lighter on top. Flotsam jetsam going on back there, who knows what. And then the sand being a little bit yellower and quite a bit lighter. That's looking very green, so I'm going to go ahead and add a tad of red. See what color we got there. That's kind of fun. That dark, blend that in. You can reshape your rocks. A bit lighter version. Out here where it's flat, you get this really, the sun's really, any of the flat surfaces, the sun's really going to be hitting. That's enough back there. Making sure if you've got anything that's too dark, oops, it's going to pop out, pop forward. So you want to be careful you don't have any too dark spots back there. Though I think we need for sure to put, because remember this was our focal point, this rock, so we definitely need some lighter color there. See, just when you think I'm done with the area, I start in on it again. Connecting those shapes so I don't have polka dots. And that, and also on the other side of that, that would be the only area where you would have something that looked darker. Darkest dark, focal point's going to have the darkest dark, lightest light, except depending on its distance. See, that's what we're working on here. Because this is in the distance, it can't be the darkest dark. It can, however, have the most edges and detail. So we'll go with that. That's drawing my eye good enough now. All right, so I think the only couple more things I'm going to do, man, if any of you have stuck with me this whole time, that's pretty amazing. I'd want to put a little bit of rock up here, but I also, I'm seeing I need to balance that very, very light over there with just a touch of it over here. Just to balance it so it's not uneven there. Okay, and I don't want a lot of detail in these rocks. I'm going to switch back over to my larger brush. They're going to have more lights and darks. They're in the foreground, but I don't want your eye to get stuck on them. So I'm just going to use my lights, mediums, and darks and just get some real big shapes going on. I need a darker dark. Just to get underneath them there. Like some kind of leading in. Maybe there's something along a little bit right there. There's always something washing up on the shore. Okay, and then I can go into my lighter colors by just, now I've got all these different colors on my palette, so it's great. I can just have anything going on there. Some of these could actually be driftwood, they could even add a little bit of green in there and have bits of kelp coming up on the ocean. Ooh, I might do that. Let's try that. Let's see if this has like a bit of kelp coming up. It's getting stuck around there. Neutralize that out a little bit. Dark, medium, and light, right? Maybe there's some green in there. That has to be lighter because it's in the back. Keep those values shifting. Okay. Of course, we need lighter. Let's see. I want that a little bit yellower. Adding white, always adding yellow. Trying to keep this really loose. Don't leave it to the imagination what these actually are. You're just thinking about getting dark, medium, and light shapes. That kelp needs some blue in it. I'm gonna get some blue going on and kind of a lighter shade. Bluer color. Let's see what that does. That's grayer. Doesn't look much bluer. Let's add a tiny bit of phthalo. That'll give us some blue. I like that. Break up these dark shapes a little bit, especially this one along the edge. Some of this blue would just kind of come in and be like reflected off of the sand. Don't want a lot. I like this blue. I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit and put some in the back too. I'm getting kind of all the same colors. Soft. Remember, if it looks too light, it's just about right. Random stuff. Alright, I don't hate that. Last thing I want to do is just give myself, well, two last things. I'm going to fix this where that darkened up and now it's real obvious, and I'm going to give myself one more layer of light on the edges of the foam. So that back there is some kind of neutralized blue. I've got this neutralized blue. Let's try that. It's pretty light. So I just want to, oops, wrong pile. I just want to get that blended in. Let's see what we've got. Oh, purpler. It's not light enough. I don't mind it being a different color. It just needs to be more similar value. It can be a little warmer. That's going to add some interest to the mountains too. Just blending that in. And hopefully that will stay light enough that it doesn't pop out like it was. Oh, I like this purple. Okay, so then the only other thing I want to do is add a little bit of lighter white to the waves coming in, and they're going to be slightly, ever so slightly yellow, so we don't want them cool and chalky. So let's see what we can do here. In this area, staying real light, barely touching the canvas, letting it pull off some of the paint, just to sparkle up that edge a little bit. Slight yellow. Give this a little more depth. Almost flat against the canvas and just pulling it back. These are just real soft, shallow things coming in. Add some of my blue-green. So at this point, you know, this is when I just tend to kind of look at it and add a little bit here or there, just little tiny touches, a whole lot more looking than painting. And I won't subject you all to that, but so keeping these brighter colors in the foreground. I'm not going clear back there with them because we want to keep those in the center. I like that, but now I need a little bit, notice how this is now feeling really off balanced again because you've got that bright white, which will settle back actually, so that white will neutralize a lot. But just for fun, I'm just going to take a touch of a bright yellowy color for some of these rocks and some of this flotsam drop of water, just to balance out the white, the very light value going on there, over there, to balance it back over here. And I want to keep all this really loose. I don't want it to be bright. I think I want to tone that down just a tad with something neutral. This dark here, break that up. I like a little bit of it, but not quite so much. And then I want to bring a little bit more of it back in here. And just a tad darker in here. You get those darks gradating from darkest to almost as dark to not as dark as you go back. All right, I don't hate that. So that seems like a good place to stop. So thank you for joining me today on this little adventure of painting this little coastal scene. And I hope I see you again soon in another video. Take care.